Is the world we live in simply material, or is there more to it? It helps to know how our world works and to know its laws if we truly want to grow. Materialism was, and to an extent still is, the main predominant scientific thought in the scientific community, at least in the mainstream. The idea that the world is mainly material, or we live in a material universe, is pretty much what most of us were taught since we were little kids. We were taught about the material world, about Newtonian physics, but I never really remember being taught about this one thing. In fact, I never remember this word leaving the lips of any teachers I've ever had. And that word is consciousness. I never heard mention of quantum mechanics and quantum physics, consciousness, or really any explanation of these so-called supernatural phenomena that mainstream science really can't explain. Now, there are many reasons why I believe this is, why I believe we were not taught these things, and that perhaps is beyond the scope of this video. But despite these things not being taught or programmed into our belief systems from a young age, they still do exist. In fact, when you look deep enough, it seems that the primary stuff of the universe is consciousness. That the quantum model is actually the foundation of everything, with the Newtonian model or the physical model being more of a byproduct of the quantum. Now, this video isn't necessarily to debate different theories, which is right, which is wrong, and all that kind of stuff. This video is actually to take a look at an idea that I believe, if understood and applied, can radically change and shift your life in a positive direction. And that is understanding the different levels of consciousness. There was a very famous researcher known as David Hawking who has a very impressive body of work that's implications are pretty mind-blowing. Hawking actually found a way in which we can calibrate and measure consciousness. But even more importantly, how we can become aware of our own level of consciousness and raise it. If you read his book, Power versus Force, where he outlines a lot of this study, you can almost hear or feel his excitement as you read it about the implications doing this would have in all of your life. He mentions the implications this would have in athletics, in business, in personal affairs, in relationships, in your career, in pretty much everything. And that's because pretty much everything is consciousness. Now, I want to give you an even simpler model than the model that Hawking suggested, although we'll look at that as well, that will make this very easy to become aware of and also to apply in your own life. And understanding this, and more importantly, applying it in your own life, will lead to massive levels of growth, fulfillment, and so much more. Now, this model takes the Hawking's model and splits it into 4 different easy-to-remember levels of consciousness. And these 4 different levels are called to me, by me, through me, and as me. Now, to me is what the majority of people on the planet right now are in. This is victim consciousness. This is the, oh no, life happens to me level of consciousness. On the Hawking scale, it shows up as level 20, which is the lowest, which is shame, and it usually typically goes all the way to level 100, which is fear. Now, by me is the make it happen consciousness, which is great because you end up taking more responsibility, but it's also where you get into the hustle, the grind, and burning out. Essentially, you feel like you're up against life and you have to fight life. And you get a very kind of obvious result when you basically step in the ring with life. Now, this level of consciousness by me on the Hawking scale usually starts at the level of 125, which is desire, which makes sense. And it usually ends at just before 200, which is courage. Speaking about courage, now is when the magic starts to happen, because that is what level 200 on the Hawking scale is. And when you think about it, to raise your consciousness to the higher levels that are a part of the minority of humanity right now, it does take courage, because you're going against the mainstream and you're very much going against the grain of how most people are living. And when you start doing this, you start entering what's called through me. And through me is very simple. It is life working in cooperation through you. This is when you work in harmony with life, when synchronicities, positive confirmations, quick manifestations, like magical moments start to happen in your life. This is when you start to live in states like joy and happiness and peace and calm and gratitude. This truly is when you tap into the magic that's always been available, but very few tap into because of a lack of understanding and application of this. The catalyst to getting to these higher states of consciousness is courage at level 200, and through me goes well into the 500s, which is the state of love. Now, once you get into the 600s in this scale, which is peace, and you move further even to 700 plus, which is enlightenment, you're in what's called as me. But that's not something we really need to explore now, as I find that through me seems to be the perfect state to be in harmony with what we are. and what it seems we're meant to do while we're here. When you raise your consciousness to the point where you are living in states of through me and moving away from states that would put you in to me or by me, you are not only making so much progress and doing so much good for your own growth and self-development, but you are also providing a massive service to the collective consciousness. You see, even someone that calibrates at 300 on the Hawking scale, which would be the state of neutrality, actually balances out about 90,000 people that are below 200 on that scale. And how can this be? This is simply because power, which is represented by high levels of consciousness, is much more potent, much more expansive than force, which is represented by the lower levels of consciousness on this scale. And this is why Hawking's book is called Power versus Force, which means that even one person living energetically in the state of through me can balance out tens of thousands, sometimes even millions of people who are living in lower conscious states. And of course, on a more personalized level, when you raise your consciousness, your life starts to beautify. Everything starts to become more balanced, coherent, and beautiful. This is actually something that the study of cymatics revealed, which we will definitely cover in a later video. To really put it in the simplest way, if you live in a higher state of consciousness, you live a better life. You live a more fulfilled life. You live a life that is more aligned to who you are or who you want to be, filled with love, joy, abundance, creativity, gratitude, playfulness, and pretty much any other energy that's relevant to those ones. However, most people unfortunately live in lower levels of consciousness. This means they live in usually a constant state of fear, shame, guilt, apathy, and similar levels of emotion. And they only ever rarely visit the higher levels. Now, visiting the lower levels on the consciousness scale isn't really going to do any damage. In fact, it's a part of the game. You need that to provide contrast in your life. But it's living in those states that causes suffering. So the big question is, where are you living versus where are you visiting? And if each day you just commit to doing things that raise your consciousness, to be in higher levels more often, you'll start to live a life that not only you love, but also helps the planet, all of us, in a very powerful way. If you want to learn how to go through lasting transformation by raising your consciousness, I would invite you to join my Facebook group, The Elite Transformation Experience, where I go over how you can do this, give you the next steps to do it as well. That's absolutely free to join down below. The more of us that do the inner work to raise our consciousness, the more the planet benefits. Join me if it resonates with you in raising the consciousness, and I'll see you in the next video.